rough summary of what I was doing. It's not really especially evocative, but I feel like it's a working title that gets the job done, since my project was about first aid and sort of trying to integrate community learning of first aid with my first aid knowledge and experience. So, my big question here was, first aid, it's simple, it's life-saving, why don't people know it? If, literally, it's like a 15-minute procedure that saves someone's life, and you can spend the rest of your life knowing this person could have died, but I was ready, I performed first aid, and now they're alive. It doesn't take that long to learn these skills. Why don't people know this stuff? It's really not that complicated. So, having come to this conclusion that people really should know this, but they don't necessarily know this, I said, how do I make them know this? What can I do to let other people spend the rest of their life in a sense of smug self-satisfaction? Because I live in that state, and it's nice, let me tell you. So, the original idea, which underwent some revision, was that I would kidnap this room for an evening class where I'd spend about an hour or so discussing first aid techniques for the sort of everyday injuries that people actually would treat. I'd skip broken bones, I'd skip heavy bleeding, I'd skip all this sort of, oh no, I found a car wreck and this man is scattered halfway across the street. Because those are rare situations, and most of the time you'll have an easier time calling an EMT. So I figured I'd focus on stuff like dehydration, heat emergencies, and sort of cuts and bruises and blisters, and the little boo-boos you deal with all the time. Because that's actually practical, it's also very easy to teach. And I tried to secure room 111, but as it turns out, I'm very bad at doing things early and getting it done on time. So I went about getting room 111 in a very slow fashion, and secured it the Tuesday before I was going to present, which was last Thursday. So I did that, I reviewed my first aid sources, but getting the room 2 days beforehand does not leave you much time for effective advertisement, as I discovered. So I tweeted about it a bunch of times, and then no one really showed up because no one knew it was happening, and also there were like 2 different softball games, a baseball game going on. And apparently, people are more interested in watching sports than they are in listening to me ramble at them for an hour. I can't imagine why. So, I talked to Mrs. Vokes about going to her first hour and speaking to her first hour class about first aid skills, which meshed nicely with what they were doing because they had just finished up a unit on first aid skills. So I did that, I went and talked to her class, and then I had a questionnaire about previous first aid experience that I passed out in my second and third hours, that apparently I picked the day when everyone was gone for fun day. So I have like 17 questionnaires filled out, but still, it's a decent sample size. So, that's a nice little picture of me looking like I'm doing something productive and speaking. We were talking about how to treat shock, and one of Mrs. Vokes' co-teachers was playing the helpful victim for me. So, I found out that only about a third of the people I'd actually surveyed had any previous first aid training, and the people who did had training that was more than about 2 years old, which is like the standard, the Red Cross certification for first aid lasts 2 years. So it seems reasonable to think that you should renew your training even if you're not certified every two years or so. So, even the people who were trained, they were no more than moderately comfortable with their first aid skills, so even people who know what they're doing don't really know what they're doing that much, at least based on the survey. So that's something that could use work. And then, among people who didn't have any training, it was like 9 out of 12 said that they did not have the time to do the first aid training, or they didn't have the time and then some people weren't comfortable going to first aid training. But not many people said they just did not want any first aid training. They just said, I couldn't make it to first aid training, I couldn't find classes, that sort of thing. So, I made a nice little graph in Excel, because graphs are cool and professional and all that jazz. So that's just the trained and untrained people. It was 5 trained and 12 untrained, 17, I screwed up the math. So, broken down by reasons for being untrained. 1 person never needed first aid training. 3 had no interest, and 9 didn't have the time. And looking at it and comparing it to my original idea, it seems like in the future, if I was to try this again, 1, I need to do a better job advertising and being preemptive. But 2, people don't have time to do first aid training. They have all these other after-school things, all these sports, activities, clubs, theater, band, drama, all that jazz. So it might work better if it was a during the day thing, like you got exempted from 2nd hour, you got exempted from 3rd hour, you come down here, somebody who knows what they're talking about spends the hour teaching you basic first aid so that you know what you're doing when it comes to regular household injuries. So yeah. Any questions?
What's your main passion? What's your biggest interest? Why did this become a love of yours that you selected for the project?
For me, first aid is this happy intersection between like academic theory, where you can sit and spend a day reading a book about it, and it can be a book that's actually got like content and useful information. And then at the other side, there's like the field, the physical application, where it's like, all right, so I read about it, I know what I'm doing, find me a dummy, I want to tie myself a splint. And it meshes together so I can have like the theory, the understanding, the knowledge, but I can also do something with it in a highly physical, like hands-on sense.
Any other questions or comments for Nick? Okay, thanks.